Welcome to our Women Wednesday leadership series. Today, we are going to focus on emotional intelligence. I'm Brandy Stitt. I'm the program director for the Women's Business Center located in Kansas City. Thank you all for joining us. Today, we are thrilled to have our presenters from Lever One once again. They're going to be doing a three-part series for us on leadership. So as I mentioned today, we're going to focus on emotional intelligence. Next Wednesday, May 19th, we're going to focus on interpersonal communication. And the following Wednesday, May 26th, will be vulnerability and leadership. I will share in the chat box the link so that you can register for the next two sessions if you're interested. So I will add that Eventbrite link into the chat box. As always, we are recording this webinar and we will be posting the recording on the Women's Business Center's YouTube channel. So certainly I will also post the YouTube channel link in the chat box throughout the session. Feel free to revisit this session whenever you choose to do so, or you're also encouraged to share the recording with other people that you think might really benefit from this type of a session. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and hand over the reins to Danielle Bearden with Lever One. And I know Michelle Morris is also on with us and is going to be helping Danielle with our slide deck.
Thank you so much. We truly enjoy being a part of these series. And this particular one is one in which is so very dear to our hearts. Again, my name is Danielle Bearden. I'm from Lever One. We are a local PEO organization down by the River Market, but we service nationwide. And anyway, I'm the director of human resources here. And this particular topic is so super dear to my heart and my efforts in bringing humility back to human resources. Human resources is a very robust term, and I want to get back to really understanding the reward in it of all times, especially throughout this pandemic. And now we're kind of coming out of it a bit. Now's the time to really bask in the reward that human resources can be and the reward that leaders can add understanding certain components. So this is a first portion of our mentorship series that's going to talk about emotional intelligence in the workplace. And really and honestly, in lots of surveys, even from 2 years ago, emotional intelligence has far surpassed the actual work experience when it comes to what organizations are looking for in leaders. So this has become a huge item of focus and is one in which requires an open mind to understand how you as a leader can more effectively communicate. So today's session will be on emotional intelligence. Tomorrow or next week, as she said, will be on interpersonal communications. And then our last topic is going to be on vulnerability and leadership. So thank you so very much for joining us. And I hope we can all find at least one reward from the start of this mentorship series. So I'll go ahead and get started in sharing my screen here. So as we talk about emotional intelligence, we really start by wanting to understand what it is, why does it matter, and truly what can we do with it? Emotional intelligence is a concept that relates to how we manage ourselves, but yet how we relate to others. So becoming aware of really how to effectively use communication and even nonverbal communication is growing in level of importance. So social intelligence is really related to emotional intelligence, right? So that's another way we can refer to it. But our emotions evolved to serve a social purpose that enable us as humans to survive. So the ability to recognize friend from foe, to reduce stress, to return our nervous system to a state of balanced, like equilibrium, to feel happy and rewarding, all super essential components of emotional intelligence. But the ability to not only recognize these and then depend on successful communication surrounding nonverbals connects you to people and their emotions. And very often what we see is we will have to address the emotion before we can address the problem. So really, that is what it is. It's the face-to-face manner of communication between one another. And truly, the world is a social place full of social beings. So even more so of why there's a level of importance surrounding this topic today. I am a huge supporter of Renee Brown. And if you haven't heard of her as a leader, I welcome you to look her up even on Facebook and follow her. She has wonderful content for leaders and managers alike on bringing back the focus to these types of topics. But I liked this specific slide because it says, I'm not here to be right. As a leader, right? You're not there to be right. You're there to get it right. And I think that speaks volumes. You know, very often, sometimes leaders will have to feel like they may need to say that, you know, I'm right, you must do this, I'm right. And really the takeaway here is we're here together to get it right. Let me help coach you get it right. And so that is, to me, speaks volumes on where we're headed in this lesson on emotional intelligence. So the ability to perceive, express emotion, assimilate emotion and thought, you know, these are all things that channel off of emotional intelligence. And learning to recognize that, but then also being able to regulate that emotion in yourself and in others. Sometimes we also refer to emotional intelligence as executive competencies, interpersonal communication, relationship management, social intelligence, leadership development. It can be referred to as all these things. But so at the start of the slide, I really talked about emotional intelligence at work and truly why it isn't necessarily everything. And let me see if I can be able to enable the sound. So give me one moment on this, and apologies, I didn't do this right from the start. But hold on one second here.
Since I started writing about and researching emotional intelligence in business, I found that the data in support of it has only gotten stronger. I saw recently a study, this surprised me, engineers, software coders and so on, were evaluated by their peers, people who work with them day in to day, on how successful they were at what they do. This turns out to be one of the strongest predictors of success in any field. And that was correlated with their IQ on one hand and their emotional intelligence on the other. And when I say emotional intelligence, they were evaluated on a 360 that looks at all 12 of the key emotional intelligence competencies and that distinguish star performers from average. The surprise was this: IQ correlated zero with their success as rated by peers. Emotional intelligence correlated very, very highly. Well, why would that be? Well, consider this. In order to be an engineer, you have to have an IQ about a standard deviation or more above average. That's an IQ of about 115 or so. And another recent paper shows that there's no relationship between career success and an IQ above 120. The reason is this: there is a strong floor effect for IQ in any role. All engineers have an IQ of 115 or more. So the range of variance is very reduced for IQ and success. Emotional intelligence, however, varies radically. So emotional intelligence means how well you manage yourself. Can you work toward your goals despite obstacles? Do you give up too soon? Do you have a negative outlook or a positive outlook? These are all emotional intelligence competencies that matter for success. Then there's the relationship competencies. Can you tune into other people? Do you notice other people? I remember hearing about two MIT grads who went into a giant tech company. One of them went around to other members of her team and asked, "What are you doing? How can I help?" The other stayed in his office and wrote code all day. And it's very clear who was going to get ahead. It was the one who wanted to be a team player. You don't write code in isolation anymore. Everyone works on projects together. You may write the code, but you have to coordinate, you have to influence, you have to persuade, you have to be a good team member. All of those are emotional intelligence competencies that distinguish outstanding from average performers. So when you think about it that way, it makes sense that even among engineers, emotional intelligence will predict who is a star and who's just mediocre. And when you think about this at the organizational level, it means you want to be sure to include emotional intelligence when you consider hiring people. I have a friend at an executive recruiting company specializes in C-level hires, CEOs, CFOs, and so on. And they once did a study internally of people they had recommended who turned out to be bad and were so bad they were fired. So these were failures. They were surprised to have failures, but they realized when they looked more carefully that these were people who were hired because of business expertise and IQ, and fired because of a deficiency in emotional intelligence. So it's more important than ever these days. And so in hiring, it needs to be considered. In promoting people, of course it needs to be considered. And it should be part of HR. It should be what you help people develop further strengths in. Because the good news about emotional intelligence is it's learned and learnable. And you can upgrade it at any point in life if you're motivated.
Awesome. So I love that thought, and I love that excerpt because it brings it to the here and now, and to really understand that truly emotional intelligence is surpassing IQ. So even, let's say, even if you do understand what emotional intelligence is, at the start, probably most will find it difficult to really apply that knowledge to your life and to the workplace. But what I've found and what I coach on is, in order to permanently change and really improve your emotional intelligence, you have to not only build your own emotional and social awareness of your own self, but to also learn to manage your relationships in the workplace and to develop that personal and social competence. So as we've mentioned previously, that social awareness is the ability to pick up on non-verbal emotion cues from others. Fun fact, 90% of our communications are non-verbal. When we add that to the challenges within the pandemic we've been through, it is super challenging to really understand the message being relayed in a nonverbal way, but also verbal. So when you are able to recognize and pick up on nonverbal cues, and some of these might be, for example, lack of eye contact from an employee, looking at their watch, being really fidgety. Maybe their eyes are welled up with tears. When you're able to recognize these, you can really understand your own and others' emotional signals, and then you could learn to build your awareness that way. Sometimes I make time during the day to just sit and observe. And I know we likely are all crazy busy, but I encourage you to take 5 minutes to sit and observe staff. What are their nonverbals doing, right? What are some of their nonverbals, and what can you read from them? Because very often, as I said, we cannot move forward with addressing a deficiency in productivity or a performance-based problem in the workplace until we have approached the emotion that the employee may be going through. And sometimes there's a very fine line in overcoming the personal side of things versus the professional side of things. So what I do is, for example, when I'm speaking with an individual who has expressed to me they're just super emotional about, I don't know, let's say something or other in their personal life, I know that that's probably not going to be the best time that they're going to be able to really hear, actively listen to goals that we want to set in the workplace. So what I'll do is I'll say, I understand you're in a spot where you're going through a hard time personally. While this is really important to discuss your goals and deficiencies in these areas, I want to give you time to regroup so that we can really have a more productive conversation. So I will likely reschedule our meeting maybe for an hour later, or maybe even for the next day. Because if we don't address the emotion first, we can never get to the problem, because employees only hear, I think, what was this statistic? I think they only hear about 50% of what you say anyway. Add an emotional problem to that, they're not going to hear much, right? So that's an example of why it's so super important to start working on how to recognize these nonverbals in our staff, so that we can choose as a leader the right time to work with them on discussing a project or a deficiency in the workplace. Some ways that I've looked at to build awareness are to suspend your thoughts in order to experience nonverbal cues as from others, because they're going to change one moment to the next. So really suspend your thoughts on wanting to talk about goals and experience the nonverbals you're getting from the staff. Are they fidgety? Are they making eye contact? Is their head down? Are they acting sad, right? It's not thinking about your own goals and objectives when you're with other people, but it's having concern for theirs. Does that make sense? And again, if there are any questions in the chat, Michelle, will you please let me know as I go along, because I'm not checking those. But then as we build that awareness and we take a moment to just observe and kind of settle and suspend our thoughts, what is that going to do? It's going to then develop relationship management. And I don't know about you, but in the workplace, we are all people. Our clients and customers that we serve are people. The vendors that help provide us with what we need are people. People are full of relationships. And if you can't build and develop relationship management as a leader, you're going to really struggle with having that trust and respect so the staff can really and truly follow your lead. And that's why this has proven to be more important even than the IQ. Because recognizing those emotions or the trouble or those nonverbals are going to be able for you to successfully plan when and how to speak to the employee. Nonverbal communication, again, is sending those emotional signals through either the muscles of your face, the posture of your body, and it really just improves our relationships in general. So I wanted to touch on that before I went into other slides, is because some practices for you to consider to help build your awareness: suspend your thoughts, experience the nonverbal cues you're receiving from the staff. Don't think about your own goals just yet, but have concern for theirs. Address the nonverbal or the emotion, and reschedule the meeting for a time where they're best going to be able to meet, right? And I understand some circumstances can't wait. There will be severe circumstances, or more urgent, I should say, and we understand that. But for the most part, there's this level of humility and empathy and leadership that has to be there to develop relationship management, which will then build out your staff to follow your lead. What it isn't, what emotional intelligence isn't, it isn't achievement. It isn't an aptitude or a cognitive intelligence. It's not your personality. It's not your static changes over time or your vocational interests. Emotional intelligence, or EQ, sometimes we'll phrase it as, is yourself plus relationships plus the environment. This slide I like to touch on that shows you the true difference between IQ and EQ. You might be so super book smart and so super intelligent on the IQ scale, but if you can't identify or evaluate or control emotion, your own emotions, and then perceive everyone else's, your IQ is irrelevant. And so, for example, in the workplace, emotional intelligence is going to look like teamwork, successful leadership, successful relations, a service-minded orientation, like I'm here to help you, I'm here to serve, the initiative and the collaboration. When we look at IQ in the workplace, it refers to success with challenging tasks, ability to analyze and connect the dots, research and development. But I promise you, if you don't have that trust and that respect and that initiative for teamwork and managing the people side, the humility side, the IQ kind of goes by the wayside. Both important. I don't want to take away that at all. But I just want to show you why EQ has continued to rise above in importance over IQ. Any questions so far, Michelle? No? I'm going to take that as a no, and I will keep moving here. We talk about 4 emotional intelligence skills, and it stems from what I see versus what I do. And this is from a leadership perspective, right? And then it's going to build out the personal competence and then the social competence. So for example, what I see. So what I see is I'm going to be self-aware of my own personal competencies. Then I'm going to also be self-aware of my social awareness, be able to recognize nonverbals around me. What I do, I am responsible as a leader for my self-management. For example, my actions cannot change because of a staff member's actions. I am going to commit to separate the person from the problem, right? And then what I do also under the social competence is focus on relationship management. So when we're building the personal competence with self-awareness and self-management, it can be really improved by paying attention to what you experience emotionally as you listen to others. This is going to illuminate your own beliefs and values, and the self-management improves when you're able to connect to your emotions and understand how your emotions influence your thoughts and actions. For example, you have an employee named Bob. Bob is significantly tardy. He's routinely tardy. And the more tardy he is, the more upset you as a leader or manager gets, right? And so you have a day where you are super ticked off at Bob because you've had multiple conversations with him. What I'm saying here is learning to recognize that the timing of your emotions driving your actions. So if I am super upset with Tom, I'm going to practice the pause as a leader and approach him later on in the day so that my emotions are not driving my actions. Does that make sense? So I will often put a placeholder there and I will say, hey, Bob, I know we've had many conversations about your punctuality. I do not have time to speak with you about it right at this moment, but I want you to know it's concerning to me and I want to speak to you about it at a later time this week. That's a placeholder. That's saying, and they don't need to know that it's really, truly, you're aware of your emotions and how they're going to affect your actions, but you are. So that's a tactic I use when I recognize my emotions and how they're going to drive my actions. Both of these, the self-awareness and the self-management on what you see and what you do, are essential for improving your emotional intelligence. Recognize your emotions, don't let them affect your actions, but also being able to recognize them in others, right? And when you look at developing a social competence, it's going to be your ability to use this emotional intelligence in your relationships with others. So what we look at is look for ways to determine how other people are feeling. How are you going to do that as a leader? How are you going to look for ways? You're going to, like I said, take 5 minutes and maybe look at some nonverbals. Work on empathy and the difference between empathy and sympathy. And then that feelings typically have causes. And I want to repeat that again. Staff members and or your feelings even have causes. And so I say this a lot too. Typically when a staff member has a problem, it stems from one of 3 things. They do not feel valued, they do not feel heard, or they don't feel like they're a part of something. If not all 3 at the same time. So if you understand, hey, are one of those things the cause for how they're feeling, and then that relates to their productivity? Could be. So as a leader, now that I know that, I know how to address that. You know, maybe they aren't feeling valued. Here's what I'm going to do as a leader to fulfill that portion. If we're looking at relationship management skills, I really like to focus on developing that open and honest, trusting relationship. And that comes with time. Having that self-respect and showing respect to others, you know, having those communication skills of listening, assertiveness, conflict management, and just encouraging collaboration. You know, what I like to say a lot of times is when we run across a problem or someone made a mistake or someone forgot to meet a deadline, as long as it's not repeated and consistent and super severe. I like to phrase it as, let's use this as an opportunity. Let's use this as an opportunity to further collaborate on what we can do differently. So those are some of the ways in which the relationship management skills can be viewed as a leader. But if you are one that tends to be on the high emotion level, if you're having trouble with your emotions and you might not be able to really turn them down or turn them off, this comes from reconnecting to your core emotions, accepting them, and then becoming comfortable with them. And we talk a little bit more about this in our vulnerability and leadership series. But when you focus more so on this, you're going to be able to manage your emotions in healthy ways, control those impulsive feelings and behaviors, really follow through on commitments. So essentially, being able to recognize your emotions, how they affect your actions, and when to act when you've practiced the pause. In the same way with staff, when to acknowledge their emotions and when to take action when they are most able to comprehend what you're speaking of. There's a personal competence in this, and I kind of like that slide because sometimes as leaders, I feel like this is totally what we feel like doing, but it's using awareness of your emotion to choose what you say and do. For example, like I said, your actions can't change because of someone else's. As a leader, you have to be the calm, cool, collected, consistent. And how are you going to do that? It's step one, recognize. Are you high emotion? Are you low emotion? What gets you super upset and what doesn't? Do you tend to act as at a knee-jerk reaction when you're super upset? Or are you trying to practice the pause and handling it in a different way? The social competence piece, again, is what I see, what I do, my social awareness of everyone around me, and how I'm going to manage relationships. Empathy is understanding where that person's coming from, whether you agree with it or not, and to how to positively direct behavior. Any questions so far? I'm not able to check the chat, so if there are any, please someone share them with me, and I'd be happy to review them more so. But if not, we'll continue to keep going. And I want to talk about emotional intelligence and outcome connection. So there's always going to be this cross section of emotional and social competencies that determine how well we understand and express ourselves. We need to identify knowledge, skills, attitudes, values, right? But the factors that are affected by that are going to be your emotional, social, relational, and communicative. Some approaches that I'd like to recommend leaders take for the workplace to keep the relationships healthy is to continuously build trust. You know, be consistent in your words and actions, follow through on your agreements. If you say you're going to do something, do it. If you can't, really share why you can't. Explain your decisions, don't just make them. This is a really big one for me. I call this full circle. For example, when I'm drafting a corrective action, which I don't necessarily like to do because I'd like to think that we don't need those, but sometimes we do. It also shows the value you're still instilling in that employee by taking the time to coach them. But full circle means, for example, Bob is consistently tardy. Bob's punctuality causes undue hardship on others in a form of reallocating his projects to other people, therefore making their projects late, therefore declining our revenue and affecting our brand recognition in a negative way. Did that not bring it full circle? So explain your decisions, explain why it is that you're talking about what you are, and the full circle. Because what I often find is Bob is like, okay, yeah, I'm late. I'm late again. I'm sorry, I'm late again. But maybe he doesn't fully understand big picture, how it affects the company as a whole and why it's important. I like to also engage others in decision making as much as I can, because what does that do? It makes them feel like they're a part of something, and that's important. So when I can, I like to engage others, and I recommend leaders doing that. What are your thoughts on this decision that is something that we're getting ready to make? You know, what are your thoughts? What do you think I should add in here? And then tackle some tough conversations. Make sure those people feel heard, remain open, and look for that common ground, right? And being able to establish when to tackle those tough conversations. Feedback should be a continual daily thing where you're talking to your employees and they're talking to you. And if they have feedback for you as a leader, really listen without being defensive, and then thank that person for sharing that feedback with you. And even if it does make you super upset, recognize that in yourself and be able to say, thank you for sharing that feedback with me. And I'd really like to follow up with you on this at a later time. That makes you consistent. That makes your actions not changing because of someone else's. And again, it tells the employee that they can come to you with concerns freely. If we're going to have an environment where they squelch their concerns and never share them, they will only be amplified later on. And remember, little things pack a big punch. I'm a firm believer in taking the time to go around the office and say, good morning. How was your night? What did you do? Hey, thank you for the day. I appreciate everything you did today. That packs a huge punch, because it starts saying that I'm interested in you. And it starts saying that I'm ready to invest in you in a workplace relationship. And then that's going to instill trust. And then that's going to allow them to follow your lead. Even that small task. But I also recommend never being afraid to say, that was my mistake. You're right. I'm sorry for that. We're human. This is what it's about, bringing the humility back into the leadership process. You can still be firm and have guidance, but this relationship management is what's going to separate the successors versus the non. And then maybe share some information about yourself, right? Be open. I mean, to the best degree as possible, and show a genuine interest and curiosity in others. You know, sometimes what I'll do is I will catch what certain people's favorite colors are, and I'll just kind of give them something with their favorite color on it one day. Or I understand or talk to them one day and they share their favorite show. I might go in the next day and say, hey, did you watch your show tonight? Was it super good? I'm investing in them, and they again feel valued in that way. Your feedback should be direct and instructive, and handle your own emotions first. As I said, if you're not in a spot to do it, don't do it, put it off for a different time. And always work on your communication style. You know, the feedback you receive from others into enhancing your style, you should incorporate that, but also pay attention to times where your style might have created confusion or maybe trouble reactions, you know, and be accountable for that. Saying, you know what, I may not have communicated that in the most clear of ways, and I'm going to work on that. So tell me how you best perceive information so that we can work together on a clear communicative style. But don't avoid the inevitable, right? It's not always going to be rainbows and butterflies, and sometimes you just have to face that reality. You can still use your empathy and your common purpose, and I really encourage you to do that. But when there are times that hard reality comes and maybe it's just not working out, that's the time to say, you know what, this is just not working out. And I have the utmost respect for you, and it's truly a business decision. Our common purpose is that we all are well cared for and successful. And unfortunately, that might not be it with our organization. So what can we do, to talk about, maybe an exit plan, or to talk about fixing your deficiencies? It's a time you don't have to avoid the inevitable. It's just all in how you approach it. And then align your intention with your impact. What does success look like if we are really focusing on this emotional intelligence side? And how will this help me? We all want to be successful in living, working, learning, social interactions. How we view success. Some can view it as a level of social status, an achievement of a goal. Success might be viewed as, well, I didn't fail. Overall ability to set and achieve personal, professional goals. And then exercising your EQ can help you. And here are the ways it can. And this is not exhaustive because there are tons of ways it can. It's going to enhance your communication, improve your personal relations, promote your better work environment. It's going to give you the opportunity to coach others. Retain your employees, which is key. Employee retention, is incredibly key. You'll be able to select and promote leaders because you've really gotten to know them. And then in turn, from a business perspective, it's going to improve your service, your outcomes, your drive. If your employees feel the reward, they're going to keep going towards that. And I just like this quote: as we look ahead, leaders will be those who empower others. So don't be afraid of people who come in with maybe more qualifications than you, with more work history than you. Empower those people for the betterment of the organization. And that is truly all I had on emotional intelligence. And I know we're recording this session, but I'm more than happy to share these slides with anyone as we go along and share those practices to consider if you're looking to expand and recognize this initiative. So any questions for me so far, because now I can see the chat. I see that when we get the slide deck, yes, absolutely, I can share the slide deck. Any other questions, guys, comments, concerns? Does any of this apply to your workplace? Can you see it benefiting? Can you see the big picture as leaders? Okay. All right, well, I certainly hope we have gotten one rewarding component out of this. And again, next week, we will go into interpersonal communications, which is going to dig way deeper into how we equate and relate to one another, and then how that builds the business perspective there.
Great, Danielle. Thank you so much. This was really interesting. And as I had mentioned previously, we will be posting the recording of today's session on the Women's Business Center's YouTube channel. I did share the link to our YouTube channel in the chat. I also shared the link for our Eventbrite page, so you can register for next week's interpersonal communication session, as well as the following week on the 26th, vulnerability and leadership. So certainly feel free to go ahead and get registered for both of those. And if there are no other questions, I think that we will conclude today's session. Thank you, Danielle. And we'll all see you next week.